curious on this though, from your perspective of being a commercial artist, because at that point, would you have called yourself a commercial artist at that moment in time? Because you're
Well, yeah,
doing art
because
for money, or were you like, no, I'm a pirate artist?
I was thinking pirate in terms of like starting companies and things like that, you know. But along the way, I was like,
Yeah,
no, I
yeah, well,
definitely,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I was definitely considering myself now an employed professional artist, and kind of my role and where they wanted me was prettier pictures sold better, right? And I had a lot of work, and I tell you, when I went to L.A. originally, this is a be careful story, and I'm going to try and make it quick, but I had paintings of Jack Goldstein's. And like I told you, I was standing in front of one in, let's call it William Morris. It's where Ophir works, man. It's just slipped me at the moment. But, you know, he used to be one of our agents at CAA. He's a great guy.
UTA,
UTA.
isn't it?
That's it. That's it. Yeah. And, and everyone in the building, all the people in the building thought it was a painting. That's how tight this work was, right? It was that tight. And it was of celestial things. But he had a whole different trip without going into that. And so when I came to LA, a lot of my portfolio at that time was paintings I had done with Jack. And but if you're looking at it, and that day we had transparencies, right? So you showed it on a light box. You didn't have, you know, the first time I saw someone show me portfolio on an iPhone, I was like, wow, wow, man, you have no idea. You know, it's illuminated, it's sharp, it's. I was like, you know, I wanted to be the old man telling her, you know, wow, we walked through 9 miles of snow. But it was amazing to see that, you know, we had come that far where you could show your work on a phone, and it was better than a $5,000 portfolio you might have invested in terms of the C prints and the transparencies and all this way we used to look at shit. Anyway, I got to LA and I have a number of 4x5 transparencies of the paintings I did working with Jack. Now, Jack was more like, he could do all the paintings, but he was more like a film director, man. It was his work, you know, but I had a studio with assistants and we made the paintings, but it was Jack's work. Like, people think because it's fine art, it's like, no, man, Warhol did a fraction of what you've seen. So did all the masters from, you know, through the ages, right? Like, art has always been a semi-industrialized pipeline since the beginning. And, you know, that's a whole nother conversation about how many paintings, to become a big-time artist, how many paintings do you need to do a year? How many shows do you have to have in which galleries in which countries? Do you want to be national or do you want to be international? Do you want to go into history books or do you want to make the money? You know, do you want to get in the right collections or do you want to sell the corporate art? Right? Where it's just bullshit, but pays. And so I come out there and I have these paintings, and I joined with Jack right at the tail end of, he was doing this sort of lightning series, and they were just spotless, man. I mean, like, you know, 9-foot canvases, right? And I found out through some friends, they go, yeah, I heard you went in there for an interview. And I go, yeah. He said, you know, they didn't believe that was your work. I was like, what? And they go, they think you're full of shit. They think you're like an actor who's using some photographs and claiming that you can do this stuff. And man, it was like a stake through my heart, you know. And I was like, wow, I did that work, and I knew how to do that work, you know. From manufacturing structure bars that would hang in museums and last for decades, you know. Like, there's a science to all that shit, and I learned it in a really short time, and actually, you profited from it, but. You know, and then I had to pay for school again, right? So there went that money. But I realized that my own work was sabotaging me, and I went, wow. And I sort of did this ritual where I just went out to an area alone, and I burned it all because I was like, wow, if this is going to be in my way, I have to sever that life raft of the history of the work, and I need to prove it now anew because it's working against me, you know. And it was also like one of those first times where I was like, I didn't do anything dishonest, but I was being looked at as someone who was. And to anyone up and coming, like, you never want to be viewed as dishonest anywhere, you know, anywhere. You don't want to look like a cheater, and you don't want to look dishonest because you're going to have to work with teams of people, and it's all about trust. And civil communication and not worrying about the people you're around. And so that's what I did. I burned it. And I burned it in a way that I was learning kind of from indigenous cultures of sort of like rights to manhood, or you risk something to become something more. You make a sacrifice. Yeah. And I'm not talking, dark occultism would get into that shit, but I'm not ever interested in practicing those types of things.
There's a lot of basically that has to do with this. Yeah, there's a lot of what you call basically mindfulness, where you have to let go of the past through symbols and rituals. So it makes total sense, man. That's intense. It's your work.
I did it.
Your heart and soul, man.
Yeah. And but on a 4x5 slide, there was zero trace that it wasn't a photograph. And I was so young at the time, and I didn't look the part, and that had worked against me a bit too. Like, I actually in Hollywood in computer graphics, right? Like, I'd go in and I'd show some work and I'd say, yeah, I want to be a technical director. And they were like, no, you want to be an art director. And I was like, no, I want to be on the machine, like, I need to know how to use the tools to get the most out of them. And they'd be like, no, that's a computer science person. You need an engineering or a computer science degree to be on the terminals. Like, that's when I started in computer graphics, right? Like, they were telling you didn't belong on a machine. And I was like, no, man, I can figure it out. And I figured it out, so I had to teach largely myself. And that was hard. It was all Unix and key-driven and very cryptic. We've come so far. But, so in the moment of that, let's call it a sacrifice, I was like, I thought I could use this, to sort of catapult. And I found out it was working against me. And so I just made the commitment that I wasn't going to have to rely on those things, and I would form a new body of work. And if that meant I had to go home, and so I went home and I was like drawing storyboards for commercials with colored pencils and doing fake, just making them up, like, and then so I could demonstrate my creativity and demonstrate a sense of visual effects and cinematography and whatever I could do. And I was just hammering it all the time, and like my girlfriend found out, who had visited from New York, it wasn't a lot of fun because I was always doing the work even on Christmas Eve. So that was kind of a disappointment. And but that's a powerful realization. You make a decision. It's like, wow, if this is haunting me, maybe I need to let go of it. And that's kind of how I felt, like it was haunting me. And so that's what I did. And I remember Sherry had heard about that later, and she just couldn't believe it, because I had shown her some paintings that I did keep. And then she was like, why don't you, but regardless, you make that commitment and you say, I'm not going to, I can resent how those people are viewing it, but what am I going to get for that? I'm just going to be another bitter bitch in Hollywood, right? It's full of them, right? Like, just like Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
For different reasons.
Exactly. Yeah. Why are you going to be filled with hate? Why would you let someone else's negative view affect you and infect you and bring you down? You're not going to let that happen. That kills creativity. It kills innovation the moment you let that disease get into you.
Yeah. And it's funny because early in life I'd met, just because of community and whatever, but I met, some really dangerous people. But that was fortunate, because I got to understand that too without having preconceived images of what these people really were. And that's from, literally from mafiosos to 1%er bikers and other, traffickers. I mean, I just had a crazy life of encountering people because you lived in these places. And, you got turned on to certain scenes where those things, become, you can actually brush shoulders with it, right? And it was like I met a guy recently, and he came up with his family from Mexico, but they really ran because his father's not a good guy. And we could say some of the worst kinds of people that might come out of Mexico. And then he would tell me about, these other guys. And I was like, well, what was their business? He'd go, kidnapping, And I'd be like, holy shit, like, that's your career, right? But like with him, and this was a young guy who's really super admirable, super smart, super hardworking. Realized, probably wasn't going anywhere there, so got to get out of there. But I asked him, and I knew this, right? I said, did you used to hang out with him sometimes? And he'd be like, oh yeah, oh yeah, close. I said, they were a lot of fun to party with, weren't they? And he'd be like, they were a blast, man. It's like, there's certain things you'll know if you know have encountered those cultures. But all of those things were really valuable. And it's kind of like, I don't remember who said it, but there was a famous actor. He said, I never met a man I didn't like. And I've kind of felt that way a lot in my life. Like, I'd be like, these are really dangerous people, so don't do stupid shit. Don't talk shit, don't lie. And if you're talked to, you got to be honest. Like, that's something people don't realize about really. I don't mean crazy people. That's another story, But really dangerous people that are, in more, let's say, outlaw, as I would say, encountered a number of multi-generational American outlaws. And I mean, like, multi-generational, grandpa spent most of his life in prison. Dad
it's that idea of know who you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've been around the world.
Dealing with, and understand that honesty, that's the only way. Being very clear and understanding the extent of what will happen if this goes south. And I mean, that background, man, talk about excellent business development and people development capability. You're basically learning how to read people.
To that point, I had a guy as a class in advertising in New York. I'll tell you this because I think it's relative. It's relevant. Sorry. This guy, he owned an agency. He was pretty big time guy, and he just thought, because he's like, I need some good karma. I need to give a little more. I'm an advertiser. I take a lot. And so he was just ruthless, man. And I just loved him, But it started off because I got feedback on something the other day, and it was like brutal feedback, right, from someone who really knows the shit. And I was like, thank you so much for that brutal, feedback. And he started laughing. He was like, I didn't know how you were gonna take it. I was like, I love it, because the soft pedaling bullshit wastes a lot of time and can really be misdirecting, right? So tell me the truth, no matter what it is. And so to that point, this advertising executive, first day of class in Manhattan, right, advertising class, the guy says, who he starts off and he goes, being a great ad exec, it's all about people reading people, shit like this. But let me tell you something. Let me ask you, someone graduates School of Visual Arts or Columbia advertising degree, but there's this kid from the Bronx and he's been dealing his whole life. Which one am I going to hire? Right? And we were like, well, obviously. He's like, yeah, obviously the kid who's been dealing his whole life. And everyone was like, this is bullshit. And he goes, you don't understand. That kid his life has depended on getting busted, going to jail, getting killed, doing this. He's reading people as he's doing a business exchange. He goes, that's what this business is about. Aside from being creative and writing copy and making billboards or commercials, it's about reading people in the pressure of business. And that kid, if he survived, he's got something special. And I'd rather have him than any master's degree from anywhere. Right? And it was like, huh. And you're like, how much?
Amen.
But he just, it wasn't like,
Amen.
Amen. And it wasn't like you were in a school where he might lose his job. He could have gave a shit, man. He could have bought that school probably. He was just giving back because he felt like, he owed it to the world, to be honest with young people learning this trade. But that was like a really insightful thing, right? It was not, and no one expected that. But when he said it, I was like, I get it. So anyway, back to the evolution. So I got into rhythm Hues, and I got to see a next level of, they started making Academy Award looking, winning stuff. Lots of Academy Awards, and Charlie Gibson, and then that's where I started meeting the really interesting people like Sid Mead. Got to work with Sid Mead, Ralph McQuarrie, the original key production designer for Star Wars, and Sid, who designed Blade Runner, and I was fortunate enough to kind of develop relations with these people, both of them, until they died. And that to me was like, I was Ralph McQuarrie, man. Sherry's like, we were doing this project for a Japanese theme park, and we were I was having problems finding. I was now becoming an art director and a visual effects supervisor in relatively short time, and I was like, I need someone who knows lighting, man, and I don't want advertising storyboards. I want shaded storyboards because we need to know the lighting, and lighting I was real because I came out of photorealism. Lighting was really important, and so. Sorry, I just skipped a beat. Where was I? I just looked at my calendar and got distracted. Lighting.
You
Sorry
need
to
someone
do this,
who
man.
knew lighting, and so Ralph.
Oh yeah, right. This is how I
That
get to
works.
Ralph. So Sherry goes, Ralph McQuarrie's not doing anything. What if I got him? And I was like, are you kidding? Like, how could I? I'm gonna art direct Ralph McQuarrie. She's like, yeah, you'll be fine. Hey, and she calls his agent, and the next thing, like, Ralph McQuarrie's in the building, and I'm in my 20s, and I was like, just completely in awe of the man. And then much more so, and the same with Sid and others of that caliber through the years, is just really genuine, smart, super talented people. And so I was just in awe. And I was like, Ralph, I got to tell you, man, I don't really know. Like, how do I direct you? I was reading your Star Wars book, man, when I was still in junior high school or whatever. It was like, he's like, don't worry. And so he's giving me instructions on how to help him. And I'm like, thank you so much. And, and then Sid, I got to work with Sid later at Rhythm Hues on another project that was a Circle Vision. It was eight screens of 70 millimeter on a camera rig that like needed a truck to tow it around, and for 200 years of future of Paris. And it was for Disney Paris, and Sid had designed it all. And then because now what I was doing was I was taking my painting skills and working with Rhythm and Hues to develop a digital matte painting system, piece of software. And then when Sid and Ralph and those guys were seeing that, they were interested. They were like, whoa, what's Lorne working on now? Like, they'd come through the body. Like, I actually stood out because I was bringing painting, and there was there was not many people in computer graphics at that time. I can't speak for ILM. They had, a wide range of people that were early, Photoshop was written by John Knoll from ILM, right? And so I was bringing two skill sets together, which was painting and textures. And at the time, when I got to Rhythm and Hues, we were still mathematically generating all the textures. And I was like, we can't do this, man. That's why shit always looks fake. Right? And they'd be like, engineers, it's a very engineered. The three founders of the companies were all engineers. Four, sorry, we're all
It's
engineers.
Some creative, man. It's from some talent.
Yeah. Well, they were talented, but yeah, like visual artistry, right, and a different level. And so they had come out of and it wasn't, I mean, we're just talking about like the godfathers of that stuff were roaming those halls and bringing projects in and stuff, but it was still like not many people were putting real painting skills into the 3D image at that time. And I was like, it's not gonna, no, you're not gonna give me stains on the side of a building that's gonna be mathematically generated. I know what that shit's gonna look like, and so I was a little bit of a rebel in there. I learned a lot about getting along with teammates and stuff, and I still had a lot of my own baggage to clean up, So I look back and I go, God, what an asshole. I was just so driven and so opinionated. Things that don't necessarily help you with a team, right? And but in the process of doing that, like I was kind of getting, like Sid would start saying, hey, do you want to come to, I'm having a party at my house or something. And I'd be like, are you kidding? And then I'd just meet like fabulous people. So, and I remember when I got hired at Rhythm and Hues, they said, where do you want to be in 5 years? And I said, I want to have a company like this. And then I heard later, they said, guy's a real asshole, but he's actually pretty good, so why not? And then it was, oddly enough, it was 5 years later we started Oddworld, and it was at Rhythm and Hues where I met Sherry and convinced her to start a game company. And even like I got an offer in person from James Cameron, a casual offer, and he had just started up Digital Domain, and Steve Gray, who I used to work with, still talk to, went on to found Heavy Iron Studios, went on to produce the Lord of the Rings games with EA, went on to build the worldwide development for Tencent. Steve Gray was a brilliant engineer and musician, a lot of things. And he had gone to Digital Domain, and then he invited me to the rap party for, what was that one where Florida Keys gets nuked in Arnold Schwarzenegger film? They drop the bomb is supposed to go off.
It's the one with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah, that one.
True Lies.
True Lies. Yeah. So
I love that. True Lies.
He invited me to Digital Domain for True Lies rap party, and I'm like, sure. I went, and then to my amazement, now he had been telling James, he goes, you got to hire this guy, and James Cameron walks up to me, right, and he goes, and he says, hey, I've heard a lot about you, and you should come over. I hear you want to do games, but so do we. So you should really come over. And it was like, I had never had a moment like that in my life, right? Like James Cameron, who did The Abyss and the Terminator, and he was asking me to come, apply at the company, come check it out, and even as monumental a moment that was in my life, I knew they weren't going to succeed at doing what they said. And this was, Rhythm and Hues was interested in people inside. Yeah.
Why? What was it that you could tell why they weren't going to make it? What was it that gave you that signal?
They all had, I would say, all the film companies in LA, and Boss Films was there too, which was Richard Edlund's company, and he had won 5 Academy Awards from ILM days, and he was the cream of the crop as well. They all had an outsider's perspective of games, and they thought that they could have one studio, and this works for commercials and film. So, as Rhythm and Hues looked at it, well, we have film and we have commercials. And the people are interchangeable. And the same's going to work with games. And what I had done was, I remember it was Josh Gabriel who went on to become, he did the first soundtracks. He did Soulstorm soundtrack. And he did the original Abe's Odyssey and Abe's Exodus. And then he went on to become like one of the world's top 20 DJs and shit like that. He's the one who turned me on to Burning Man. And back, I spent a lot of years out there too. But through Josh, he goes, hey, man, there's this dude I met, man. He's from Boston, He's like that New England type, He's got that, like, kind of hardened East Coaster thing like you. And you should meet him. His name's Tommy Talricchio. He's down in Virgin. And Tommy, of course. And so I'm in the film business at Rhythm and Hues, and
Absolutely.
He hears that there's someone at Rhythm and Hues that wants to meet him. He's like, yeah, come on down to Virgin, man. We'll show you. And that's where I meet Dave Perry, and they show me what they're doing, and that was kind of remarkable. And I was I had come to the realization that what we were doing, we were currently charging $1 million a minute for CG, the level we were doing. If you wanted a minute footage, it was $1 million. 4 minutes, $4 million. It was kind of like that. And I was like, but the problem with a film and the problem with a commercial and the problem with linear technology is that we can make a 90-minute film or a 30-second commercial, and it's only a 30-second commercial forever. But in games, and this is what I was starting to realize, to game makers, this is really obvious, right? To me, I was like, how's this really working? And how much memory are you working with? And what's your CPU power? And I was like amazed at what these guys were doing with so little. And I'm starting to figure out, I was like, so instead of having a guy walking left for a second, I can consider that a cycle of a guy walking left, like out of cell, animation or something. But if the game machine is playing it back as a loop, I can have a guy walking left forever. Or if I'm in the old world, it's a second. Or it's a guy walking left forever. And I was like, I started to like figure out like how much content are we scheduling for a film project, and then I remember Mist came out, and that really like we were all really paying attention to that. And I was like, wow, here's Mist, where you're kind of moving through a 3D world, and it's actually production design really cool. And then here's what games are now, you know, and they were showing me like Cool Spot and Aladdin that was in production, which was the first time like Disney animators were working on a game, right? And I was like, okay, I get it. And I was like, wow, so I could probably break a character down as a simulated life form that's going to be controlled interactively, and I might create 4 minutes of animation sets that can become a 60-hour prolonged experience. And that ratio blew my mind. I was like, and now when I was in aerospace, I got to see the really trick simulator shit, like the super high end, you know, the $14 million Evans and Sutherland's, the and being connected to theme parks. Kind of, I knew this all was going to happen. Where the military sector, when the wall came down in Berlin, the military sector was rushing to get into the theme park entertainment business because they knew, you know, Cold War was over, and so I was watching the simulator companies because that's what became the ride films, was the military simulators, right? So I was watching all this, and I was like, wait a minute. And when I looked at like a real war simulation, where you had like a tank pod over there and pilot pods over here, and then they're all in the world together fighting, that blew my mind. I was like, that's $14 million. Then I was like, but wait a minute. You know, I had seen that years before, and now I'm trying to figure out, I'm like, wait a minute, this is Moore's Law. How far away before that $14 million simulator is the Nintendo machine? And then I figured out pretty damn soon. And that was kind of a shocker. So a few of us were kind of getting that. Larry Weinberg, who went on to found Poser, if you remember Poser, you know, that software that was like a mannequin posing for artists.
Absolutely, man. Poser was amazing.
And that was
fantastic.
So Larry, yeah, like that was Larry Weinberg, and we were all, you know, like, we should start a game company, but we were thinking we should do it inside Rhythm and Hues. But from learning about how games were made, it was such a different technology art form that I knew you weren't going to be able to have people who make films and people who make commercials suddenly go over and work on the game effectively. Like, I just knew that wasn't going to work. It was way different pipelines. It was a way different, a very different science. And if someone was going to be making games, they had to be only making games. Like, they had to be focused because it was going to be really hard, like harder than film. And so everything's a question of scale and money and stuff like that. But really, I saw this is a more difficult science because we're using, like, we had Silicon Graphics mainframe, not mainframes, but the big, we called them the refrigerators, right? They were like $100 million, $500,000 computers, and they were rendering, they'd have 8 processors and gigabytes of a gigabyte RAM, which was like unheard of, you know. And but it was still like we were crunching a single frame sometimes was like still, you know, an hour a frame. By the time all the layers were rendered and then composite and all that shit, it was like slow going. So you needed to just stack on that horsepower. But I was seeing what these guys were doing was they were basically creating graphics and then playing it back in these cyclical patterns with, you know, logic structures to them. And that then they were kind of creating virtual life forms. And that's when I really I was like, this is going to get really sophisticated really fast. And if we don't get in now, we're not going to get in. And we can't dally around like, oh, we'll work on some films and then we'll work on some we'll work on some commercials and then, you know, work on some games. It's like, you're going to lose that way. And so I was figuring out it's just not going to work in that model. And that was what Digital Domain was going to do. And so I just knew it wasn't going to work because games were too hard. And the film industry was making I think in general was making a pretty big misjudgment, which was that because the graphics were simple, then it can't be that hard, right? And at that time, you know, towards the end of Rhythm and Hues, someone had released Doom as a Unix compatible. So now the Unix stations we were all teamed together with, we were playing Doom networked. And we were doing flight simulators, and they looked pretty good for they were all in 3D networked. So like when Skyfox came out, the game industry was really excited. We were kind of chuckling because we'd been playing that shit way better, way faster, 60 frames per second for years already. And so I saw that coming, and I could tell that in order to be a successful game company, you were going to have to, from the DNA on up, be a game company. Or if you were at a bigger operation, it was going to have to become its own division and not with interchangeable people. And that's where I just didn't feel like anyone else was going to succeed who was thinking about it that way. And the people in Hollywood that were aggressive enough to think that way, so it was Boss Films, Rhythm and Hues, Digital Domain, I just didn't think their model was going to work. And and out of all those people, I was the only one who was actually trying to go to game studios to see how they did what they did.
How do you see this now with the unified pipeline? Okay, so like that's then.
Yeah.
Now Unreal, Unity, and them jumping in. How do you feel that is now? I mean, it's been 30 years. How are you feeling about it? Do you think they have a chance now? I mean, where do you see that?
Well, yeah, we're in a whole different ballgame. And I believed this a long time ago. So, real quick, like when I jumped into the games, I had just become a visual effects supervisor, which, in visual effects was you got to be pretty important in the pipeline production. And the film guys were going, "What are you doing, man? You going into games?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they were like, "They look like shit, man." And I was like, "They do right now. But if you don't get in now, you're not getting in later." And I just knew that as well. So when we made the jump, people were like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And Sherry was really a legend in Hollywood with visual effects and computer graphics as a producer for the stuff. And then she was going to do it too. So people were like, "You guys have lost your minds." A few years later, they're like going, "God, I can't believe you saw that coming." This game's just exploded, right? And but when I was looking at it in games, it was a hard lesson, man. Making games was really a brutal lesson because, and this is what I started telling filmmakers that were interested later. I mean, big time guys, because I was with CAA for 10 years, and you got to meet everyone. And most of the people I ever admired, I kind of got to meet if they were directors. And they'd start talking about it. I'd be like, "Here's the difference. There's a reason no film director has directed a successful game." And Spielberg, had his names on some games. Lucas had his on some things kind of. But it was really, Ron Gilbert and Tim Schafer and that team that was making it happen, and it was happening under Lucas, but it wasn't George. And so when the big guys got involved, they fucked it up. And the reason was, as I would explain to some later, I'd say, here's the big difference. As a film director, you can get on the set and scream and yell. You can do that. That's pretty standard for Hollywood. And you can just shout at a team until you get what you want. You can hire and fire because you have unions that know how to use the tools. There's an industry of Teamsters that knows how to set up lighting. Not in games. And it is heavily engineering dependent. So I would say you get to be in an auteurs medium. You get to be the one who demands what they're going to do, and as long as they send it back for enough changes, eventually you'll get what you want. And I said, you'll never deliver a game that way. Because because this is not being an auteur to create a masterpiece. This is mastery of compromise. Because you don't have an hour to compute a frame. It has to render in a 30th of a second at that time, or a 24th of a second, depending on what PAL or US, and or NTSC. And so you show up and you start screaming with a room full of engineers. Wait till you see your code, right? Good luck, right? Because they're in a whole different reality. Engineers are in a whole different landscape. One comma, right? They stopped the space shuttle mission because of one comma instead of it was either a comma that was supposed to be shit, it's just so long since I was in English class. Not a colon, but a semicolon, right? So it was like one of the scientists, as the thing is on the pad, ready to launch, recognized that it was one or the other, right? It was a semicolon when it should have been a comma. And they stopped the mission, and the thing would have blown up, right? That's engineering. And I'm not saying engineers are saboteurs, but what I'm saying is any people that you want to piss off and denigrate and make look bad in front of other people.
Knowledge workers, man. You got to be careful.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You know, it's like all kinds of mistakes can just happen, right? And now you're dealing with something where you're talking about 500,000 lines of code for a single product, 1 million lines of code. And so, fortunately, you know, I was learning how to be a better manager, which I think is one of the all-time art forms that people don't spend enough time trying to learn, you know. And I think we continually improve our craft in that as long as we pay attention, right? You're dealing with lots of people in different continents. And like even, you know, we worked together. We didn't talk about this, but we got to work together on the Soulstorm project and Streamline.
Awesome.
And
awesome
it was
experience.
awesome. It was hard, right? We're at different time zones completely. Like, you know, their morning was our night and all of that. It wasn't as bad as Australia, time zone differences, but it was tough. And I got to say, you know, just to... There's a guy, I was trying to remember his name, and Tiva. Yeah. Right? And and then Rainier, I spent a lot of time working with the two of them. And both of them I was just completely charmed by and impressed by. But there was one thing with what I was telling Benny, who had joined me to, you know, finish up on SKUs of, we'd worked together a few times in different projects through the years. Benny Terry, you know, who you know, of course, and he
great.
became,
Great Benny is fantastic.
Yeah, really, really skilled, articulate, smart man, and a good person, and that's always important to me. But when he came on, I go, look, this is distributed development now, and this is about hearts and minds. And if we don't win hearts and minds, we're dead. Now we still got to get a good product, you know. But it's not like when you're in the building, you'd be like, you know what, we're having some friction with that guy. You have some friction with someone in a distributed development environment where you're not in the same office, or you're just on the call, but you don't get to read the face. So it was harder earlier when we didn't have as much Zoom and shit going on. But I came to realize, I was like, if you're not honest with people, that doesn't mean irresponsibly disclosing, you know, everything. But it just means if you're bullshitting people and they see through it, you're screwed. Because you can't tell what they're doing because you're not in the presence. It's not like you could be like, why are those three guys going to lunch every day and why do they look so unhappy? You know what I'm talking about when you have a big operation and, you know, someone's not happy, and, you know, now you're looking at maybe there's an exodus, maybe, you know. And so that became a big part of it. It was like, they have to respect us when we hang up the phone, even if we're being demanding, or even if we have to really manage the human element here. And I learned that, you know, through starting to do more distributed development, which was not easy. And Soulstorm was a mother, right? So many lessons in that one for me. But in the course of that, this is just kind of funny, but Rainier was great, right? And Tiva was, I was working with this guy that works on your team, Tiva, and his voice was like so animated, would be mildly animated, but it was so authentic and sincere and innocent sounding, right? Like, I was really taken with his voice. And so you know where this goes, right? So I was like, we had a thing in the game that had to be read, and it was a note that was left on a dead Mudakin that was supposed to get to Abe, and I was like, Tiva. And I was like, Tiva can do this, man. He's perfect for it. Our voices were always done this way. It was like, someone screwing off in the back and they're making a funny voice. I was like, that's a great voice. Get in his booth. And so just had that Jim Henson sense of, if you're doing the puppet, you can do the voice. So I wouldn't say that every animator is a voice character, but a lot of them would be great ones. Just people goofing off in the office, and you hear it, and you can tell if they're cadence, if they're good at it. And with Tiva, it was just his voice. And I said, okay, guys, talking to Bruce, I was like, figure out a fee or something, but we got to get Tiva to read this. And then we were like, well, how do you want me to act? I said, not at all. Just read it. It'll be perfect. Just read it, right? So the first one was read like a performance. And I was like, no, man, this doesn't sound, I want you, right? And then he just read it like that. I was like, perfect, And it's just funny. It goes to, you can still make those relationships virtually. It's becoming a thing that we have to do now, especially post-COVID. But in distributed development, and this is what I was basically telling the directors back then, if you lose your team in games, you're dead. If you're making a film, you can probably replace it, unless you're like high-end special effects and there's 2 companies, 3 companies in the world you can go to. But you're dead, man. So that behavior you get away with here, it's going to tank you. And that's why you have never seen a game released by a big-time film director. That was my theory on why. So all those things, that's what led into.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It makes total sense. I mean, basically, it's a culture difference. It's basically a respect difference.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what that comes down to right there, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of like trying to have a long-distance love relationship. You might have said something wrong on the phone. If you were together, you'd know it when you got home, but you're not going home. And so there's a whole universe of possibilities that can unfold. So that was really challenging. The distributed development, being transparent, and tempering how there's plenty of times I go, what? I want to go, what the fuck are you doing? That's nothing about what we talked about. So instead of saying that, it's like, okay, let's come back to this. I got to take a break. I just want to talk to, I'll talk to the producer. I'll go, look, we were on the phone the other day. We went over this. That's not the direction that was implied. Why don't we just go back to that? I got other things to do, and then not get heated, not make anyone feel stung, not, all these things about human management become even all the more important in a distributed development, because so much more is happening that you don't get to read. Like, you don't get to read the room, There's no room to read. You just got a couple minutes on camera together. But I'm sure you must encounter it all the time, because you guys are contracting to, and not encounter it, but you can validate. I have no doubt you can validate what I'm saying, because you deal with this every day.
Every day. I live with
Every
it.
day.
I live with it every day. And
Yep.
honestly, I think a lot of people just lose sight of the fact that, creative endeavor, engineering, making games, it's a human task.
Yes.
You have to feel each other. You have to see each other. Tremendous empathy, tremendous willingness to overcome through extreme communication, over communication, right?
Right.
Because if you can't do that, it doesn't work.
Right.
That's what I've learned.
So here, I was really fortunate that, I highly recommend it, and it. If you can be on advisory boards somewhere, you get, you make a lot of relationships, you get a lot of more insights. They're very valuable. So I've tried to, have my fill of those over the years. But in that, I was fortunate enough to be on one with the University of the San Francisco Academy of Art, which became the San Francisco University of Art. And they put together just an incredible advisory board, right? We'd meet once a year. And, I mean, literally, it was like most of the people in the room either had Academy Awards or the head of research from Microsoft. It was just a great bunch of people. But one of them was Ed Catmull, who was president of Pixar. And yeah, now Sherry knew those guys back when they were still at ILM, one, and then two when they were Pixar, but Steve Jobs hadn't bought in yet, and I remember them from then. They were trying to sell medical imaging software, right? If you can go, Pixar founders, including John Lasseter, they were trying to sell that kind of software and make short films so they could eventually get like noted and then eventually make motion pictures. And talk about a determined group that stayed focused on one goal. Eventually, we're going to be the new Disney of 3D animated films, and people didn't even believe it was possible then. But anyhow, being on the board with Ed, not a whole bunch of times, but enough times that we're trying to figure out like some cultural problems. And I was fascinated to listen to this guy. He'd say, well, he'd start talking to him. He'd say, well, how do we focused on the problem in Pixar of how computer graphics, making animated movies is a team sport, right? It's not just like a director's sport. It's a team sport. And so how do we make the creation of art a team sport? And then I was like, yeah, right. And I'd just be listening to a guy who I think was just off the charts genius, And so, I was fortunate enough to ask more questions around that and have some discussions around that. And then how do you help a school to employ that? What happens to morale? And I remember something that happened with Toy Story 2 where they made it, but John Lasseter was going to be making something else. And then after I don't know whether it was 100% done, but it was close to done, they just scrapped the whole thing because they were like, it's not working. And then they put John back in the director's seat, and then eventually, Toy Story 2 came out as a hit. But when they scrapped it, and this is Ed was telling us when we scrapped it, they just had this massive morale problem because people had put all their time and effort into the work, and now it was just going to be redone. And that's a thing too, right? People get fatigued by redoing things, and I've certainly burnt people out on that because they want it to be good enough, but it's not hitting the bar of what we're after, And so it's like up here and come here. Well, here, no, it's here, And then you have morale problems, and then so if you have a whole operation that was involved in something that crashed, and this is how I felt after Stranger, was then Stranger. I don't want to talk about the spilt milk, but Stranger deserved a way better shot than it got, and that was a publishing, and it was a problem. But what it meant was we did a great job on something, and it's funny because we just released on a couple more SKUs, and fans are excited. But it held up. It held up to the test of time. It was a unique game. It broke some ground, and I would say evolutionary, not revolutionary, right? Like Doom was revolutionary, Minecraft revolutionary, but it was evolutionary, and we worked so hard to get it done. We put so much effort into it, and then we basically got screwed at launch, and it was hard for me to face the people because as a leading position in the company, it was like like. We rowed your boat, we did a great job, and we didn't even place. And we should have won. And so no matter what, no matter whose problems or who's at fault or whatever, that's a serious morale hit to a team. And that's something I was upset with the publisher about. I was like, you just did, to those people. Now you think we're just going to get on your happy fucking train? Not a chance, right? Not a chance. Because this is what it's like. This is what you've proven it's like working with you, and I could say that in a number of cases of different film projects and shit like that. So I'm not trying to pinpoint anyone for doing something bad. We're speaking to the demoralizing of a team, and it was hard for me to live with that, because sometimes you just feel certain things are out of your control, but you have to live with the result. And if it's your house and it's happening under that roof, it's your fault. And whether that's true or not, it is. Right? Like that's how it falls out.
How did you deal with How did you deal with it, man? Because this is really, you were the leader and you're the owner of the company. I mean, we've all been there where something,
Well,
like to your point, we did
I
everything
think-
right, and then, yeah.
So we had gotten to the point where we were ready to do another big IP, and then they greenlit it, and they wanted to. We were going to sell the company and go into this next IP so they could really get behind it. And this goes to, is it your IP or is it their IP? And we didn't get too much into that in this discussion, but for another time, I'd love to talk about it. And so if it's your IP, no one's as motivated to make it succeed, right? It's hard to grasp. Like, you don't necessarily see that coming. You go, I got to get a game. We can make money on it. They're like, yeah, but not enough money for us. And that's just a business thing, right? But it's real. And it's usually like smiles and handshakes make deals. But then at the end, it's not all smiles and handshakes. Hopefully it is, but usually it's not.
Seldom is it smile and it turns into hell on earth.
Exactly. And so Sherry and I, we looked at each other, maybe a little impulsively, but I was also worn down, man. Like I hadn't, since starting Oddworld, it was a crunch the whole time. And I didn't feel good about sort of demands that were on people. Like I wanted it to be more rational, but we had to make games that cut through, and they had to be done for what the industry was willing to pay, even on the high end. And at that time, the high end wasn't anything like the high end today, in terms of dollar amounts. And we walked out, and she goes, and we had just gotten greenlit for another huge, project, and tens of millions of dollars, and then the prospect of cashing out on the company. And I think at the time, if I relived it, I think I would have went through it. Instead, we just went, fuck it. Why do I feel sick? I go, I feel sick too. And he's just like, I'm going to marry the girl that I know I can't trust. That's what it felt like. And I just went, fuck it. I'd rather walk away from the altar. And that's what we did. And we thought, we'd go on to make movies. And then we got a movie deal. And then we got into development, and in 2008, banking crash happened. And I realized there's no way a rated R, CG animated film at this budget at this time is gonna get out there. Like all the strings got pulled back. What happens in Wall Street crashes, and so that didn't work out. And then so we didn't do it. In hindsight, if I'd have done that project and we succeeded, where I felt like we were going to have, a shedding of the team because people would be disillusioned, and then new big ones coming out, and why should I have faith? It's just, people are people and humans are humans. And so I felt like there would be, when you're raising money, it's qualified against your ability to deliver. And that means your team is kind of listed. It's a big part of that lineup. And if like, let's say, some important people on the team leave, that'll be used against you, right? Like you might have someone that's so excited about what you do that they're willing to help you, which was like the case with Microsoft at the Xbox launch. They were astoundingly helpful to those people. I'm eternally grateful that came down and stayed with us to deliver Munch, to make launch. Eternally grateful. And to Sherry for having the balls to call Microsoft after we did the deal and say, we're fucked up. We're not going to make launch. And they're like, what are you talking about? You're way ahead of everyone else. She's like, I'm telling you, you got to get down here because we're not getting the performance up. Like, you got to get down here. And they did, but most people would be covering up. But Sherry was the opposite. She's like, look, if they're screwed, we need to let them know now, right? And that was like, that's not a typical thing in business, right? People, start trying to, they want to keep the money flowing, but they want to hide their errors. Well, Sherry was the type where she's like, if we got errors, if we got warts, we're showing them because they need to help us with this and we need to be straight with them. And so we had just done this big deal, and then she's calling them and going, we're in big trouble. And we're not going to make your launch. Yes, you are. And they were trying to convince her. And she'd be like, Seamus, we're not. Ed, we're not. Ed Freeze. And then, we got to the bottom of some of the handicaps that we had at that time. And we she had the balls to contact them and be honest with them. Like right after we signed a deal, and it wasn't a get-rich deal. It was a finished project deal, right? And so that was one of the reasons I was always wanted to be partners with Sherry. Was she would do that stuff. She wouldn't be intimidated by who the big guy in the room was. She would always be straight with him, and sometimes like brutally straight. And with the real sharks, they would sort of laugh and then really like her, you know, because they knew they weren't being bullshitted. They were getting the straight shit, and most people won't give it to you. And I really respected that. And you know, that was that moment.
No, that honesty and directness is absolutely important, man. I mean, that's
Yeah,
how you know you can go to battle with someone. You go to war with the
right.
person who has your back, even if you don't like what they're saying all the time. That's
That's
the
right.
honesty,
That's right.
and you need it.
And
It's the only way you win.
I continually, even as a creative, like earlier, I'd be like, this is a great idea, and if you all just get behind it, you know, like I'll make it happen. And even if it's not gelling, I'll be like, we can do it, we can do it. And I'd have to be the bearer of that torch, you know, and everyone wouldn't necessarily see it. As time goes on, I want to be smarter, right? So sometimes you get fixed on an idea, especially if you're creative. And is it the best idea it could have been, or are you just thinking it can happen, and this is the one you're going to plant the stake in, and you're going to, you know, really trumpet it? And but as time goes on, I'm like, I'm analyzing my own ideas a lot deeper, and I'm going like, well, wait a minute. If I was to, you know, sit around this side of the table, looking at it from a marketing perspective, how am I now seeing it? Looking at it as monetization, how am I now seeing it? Looking at it as, you know, all these different parameters that make things successful or not. And I want to try and measure them more accurately with time rather than just be the know-it-all, you know, who might wind up being wrong. And then you really crash, you know, and, you know, sometimes shit happens. But the process of it got a little harder for me was I wanted our stories to be like modern myths. So, you know, all these experiences and the world and my research and people I knew and tragedies and traumas I saw, victories that I saw. I wanted to sort of turn that human condition into something that would be inspiring for people. And that was going to be the mythos of Oddworld. And then, you know, my research took me into some extremely dark areas. And, you know, you've seen my library, right? Uh, and
Yeah,
it,
amazing library, everyone. Just so you know, he has one of the most fantastic libraries I've ever seen. It's incredible.
if I ever had a passion about collecting anything, you know, once I decided I was going to be an artist, it was books. And yeah, so that collection is measured by the ton now. But the point is like if like I was really interested, like how does the world really work, and how do industries really work? And the more I came to learn about like population control and regimes and totalitarian regimes and what was the real inner workings of a revolution versus what we were taught, a lot of that shit was really dangerous, like really dark. And so then that would make me say like, if these people are up here but they believe this, where's that coming from? And then you wind up going through ancient history and all kinds of things. And I wanted our work to reflect, like I never wanted to lose with Oddworld as an IP, I wanted it to be something that was inspiring to the underdog forever. And that hopefully we had the opportunity to create more timeless tales the way myths are. That we go, this is a story, and the reason it was created for its day is because people that could use this insight could get benefit from it, right? It wasn't just so a film company could, you know, deliver on a box office, could deliver to the financiers, right? Like that's the integral pieces of business. But to me, I was like, novels have changed. Novels changed my life. Films changed my life. Yoda for sure changed my life, and gave me things that maybe helped me survive some of my darkest potential hours. You know, like for real. And so we find myths or religions or theories that we'll grab onto that give us more stability as we're charting our own course through life, right? Which is full of upsets, full of speed bumps, full of getting lost. If you know, and only increasingly so. You know, as far as I can tell, look at the wealth divide. You know, it was doing pretty good, and more poor people around the world were becoming, uh, uh, were starting to earn, let's call it, more sustaining lives.
They're emerging out of poverty. They were
Yeah, I mean, you could give
happening.
great talks on
Moving
this.
forward.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked a lot about your model and the people you find around the world, and so you know big time what I'm talking about. And where I was coming from was I was like, if we have the ability to make that content, if we're found ourselves, however we got there, in a position where we could tell stories, are we just telling them to make money? Are we just telling them to, as the film critic challenged me, are you just masturbating to your childhood fantasies? Or are you going to make a difference on something? And, nothing like New York art intellectuals to just fucking cut you to the bone. But that was invaluable because it was like, wow, I do think about things, and I was thinking about everybody on the planet. I was like, I used to tell Sherry, I'd go, there's this great story inside of everyone, and people are really getting onto this environmental understanding. And I remember I'd be like sitting in a conference room with really smart people that graduated in economics and successful Academy Awards. And I'd say something like, well, the reason we've got these problems is we're burning down a rainforest for the sake of growing fucking Happy Meal 99-cent burgers, for cheaper ranching. And these really educated, smart people would be like, where are you getting that shit from? And I was like, you don't know. Like, you're ignorant. You're ignorant about this. Now, I wouldn't say that because I didn't want to get stabbed. But it was like,
you also need
wow.
to eat. So, it's like, we got to get
exactly.
paid.
But it was like, wow, you really don't know. And that was disturbing because they thought they were way smarter than me, and maybe in terms of how we measure intelligence, they were, but they weren't wiser, and they didn't know this shit was going on because it wasn't being brought to them by the media they trusted. And if we all have a common enemy on this planet, it starts with the thing that's influencing us with misinformation, and that's predominantly the media. Like, I'll just fucking say it, because if you're paying attention to that as your beacon of truth, you're in deep fucking shit. You're fucked. And it's just a question of time, why and how, but you'll be led into some dangerous places to be at this point in time in world history. And so I really cared about stories that could kind of help people out of what I had seen and what I had felt myself was kind of an easy path to fail on. And I mean fail in the big way, wind up dead, wind up in prison, wind up living a life that terrifies you every night. You're watching over your shoulder for whatever reasons. And I was like, if people just had more hope, this sounds kind of hokey, and hope is becoming a less popular term now, particularly with the youth. They're like, fuck hope, man. You guys shot hope, I don't necessarily agree, but I can see where they're coming from, right? And so I was like, well, can we do things that aren't just like when I ate a bag of potato chips, I'd be like, it tasted great when I was eating it, but I feel shit afterwards, and I didn't get anything from it but shit that was bad for me. And then I felt that way about movies. I was like, why the fuck did I just watch that, man? I forgot about it by the time I had dinner afterwards. Like, it was that empty of calories, right? But a great movie, like something like Apocalypse Now, or The Godfather, Kubrick films, Clockwork Orange, is like, how many years are you still thinking about it, right? Like, what did it open in your mind that made you see something differently, and now you see the world differently? And really, that's the mission of art, like throughout history, is, for instance, we were putting paintings of the hunt on the cave walls. We were visualizing what we needed to do. We were visualizing the success of what we needed to achieve to survive. So art has always been a lighthouse, to the masses. And then it got co-opted by royalty for a while, through history, shit like that. But that's when I came to see. I was like, wow, this is very valuable. But as industry increases, I'd read books, and the writers were getting more disillusioned with Hollywood because it was all about the money, and it was less about the content of the film. And then, reality TV shows disillusioned so many TV writers that felt the same way. And, it's just a different time, a different story with a different medium. But it all comes back to the same stuff. If we're going to do something, and I just have I could do other IPs that aren't necessarily on this thread, and I think that's totally fair as well. But on the Oddworld thread, I felt like if we're going to do something, and we wind up in a place where we can see that one of the things I was looking at was I was like, how many hours of mind share in North America are going into video games next year? And I'm like, well, what's the average successful game? How many hours does it get played? How many people are playing? How many games are sold? And I came up with something that's like 92 of 60 billion hours of mind share, of human mind share went into video games in North America in like 92. I mean, it was like what? It was like you had to do the math again to go like, really? But if you just thought the average person playing Mario was playing 50 to 100 hours, right? And Sonic, those were games that were out then. And so I started to feel like if we have the power to captivate the audience, to keep them engaged for that long, are we just selling them Twinkies? Are we just selling them Snickers bars? Or, as I used to think of it, or is it a carob-covered granola bar in a Snickers wrapper, right? And like, might it? That's what I was thinking. I was like, that's pop media. So I started, I was kind of coining the term Trojan horse pop, which was like, if this is where the mind share is, you can make your big painting that you think is going to change the world. And the fact is, even if you're the biggest artist in the world, it's just going to hang in a gallery of elitists, intellectuals, and it's not going to make a difference the way that was happening back in the day, and before modern media, when a gallery show could change the world, and that was happening. But we're in a different time now, so the more disposable pop mediums are getting more mind share. What is the audience getting from it, aside from escapism? And so I just felt, as someone who had sort of gone through the art world and heard their trip, some of which was mind-blowing, others which was nauseating, to the film world where you had people making magnificent stories that we never forget for the rest of our life, and others that we forget by morning that we even saw it. There was a lot of empty calories in media, and I was thinking, well, what's the most nutritious calories that we could deliver? It's got to be an engaging piece of content. It's got to be a good game to play. It's got to be, it's got to have all these market requirements, and there was a reason why documentaries were a way smaller market than big box office summer releases, right? Like, if you're just delivering information, you can cut that audience way down. But what if we can deliver more nutritious information? I felt that way about Star Wars. I felt that way about the other directors I mentioned, Cameron's work. Like, I thought the most powerful love story I ever saw was in The Abyss. Yeah. Like, I wasn't expecting that at all. That scene where, he's willing to die, and it was like, are you kidding me? The trust. I had never seen that powerful moment aside from like Sophie's Choice, or Schindler's List, where it was just like intense, emotional heightening between the trust between characters. I was like, wow, how powerful is that? And so, in trying to make content that I felt could be nutritious, I said, well, then it really has to be we have to design stories that sort of resonate. And I can't tell the truth about this world, right? Because if it called Rupture Farms McDonald's, man, that game was never getting made, right? So, it was like you create a fantasy world like Animal Farm, and then you I called it the broken mirror of our own, the dark side of globalization, with a big smack on the funny bone. So I was thinking, if we can do that, we can open up, get back to the idea of the hero's journey, but sort of place that in a context that the modern pop-consuming audience was deeply engaged in. If you could do the things that made it engaging, then you might have a higher calorie product for the person buying it. And then I'd say we were validated. I guess to date we're past 25 million games, out there, and the stories that we've heard have been, I wish they were all sold at full price, right? There's all kinds of deals on that stuff, but still, I got to be grateful.
It's all relative, but still,
yeah. But and so when you look at that the way I was, which is like we have the opportunity to put a dish in front of someone. You know, do we want to take out all the calories, not care about it, or do we want to make sure it's not only good tasting and you like it, but it's actually you can get something out of this that you might find helpful in life. And it wasn't the way I would market the games, but I felt like if that was true, they should take off. You know, they should find an audience. And then we were validated in all kinds of crazy ways, man. I mean, crazy stories of, you know, some shit so dark that people experience, like, I can't even bring it up. And but they would reach out and say, this is what this game did for me, and I can't thank you enough. You know, oftentimes with child abuse, oftentimes with the victimization in different ways, various kinds of mental illnesses, hopelessness. You know, depression is pretty common these days. But people would testify, they'd send us letters, they're like, I was so depressed, man, but I started laughing, man. And then you didn't tell me I failed, ever. But every time I did, it was kind of hilarious, right? And so I was like, how do we take the dopamine moment, and how do we take the fail moment, and how do we make them kind of rewarding, right? And this is where one thing that was really important to me in our games, and it persisted ever since, was that in the whole series was infinite lives. And I believed that because I felt like limited lives was still a residual effect of the coin-op industry, where the game had to be short so they could get another quarter out of you, and as soon as you were done that quarter's worth, it was kicking you out so the next quarters could flow in. You know, and I felt like, I'm a huge fan of Miyamoto, you know. But I felt like there was some of that still in his games, because I'd be like, why did I fail? Why? Because I failed 3 times, I got to go repeat even more now. Like, you just made me really feel like a failure. I would have rather just kind of hammered on the same one, you know. And our games are far from perfect, and at times, you know, notoriously hard. And you know, lockdown didn't help anything about getting the game done that you think you're going to get done versus the game you can get done. But the point is that I thought, like, if we were doing those things and we didn't tell people you failed, right? We could say, like, Abe failed because you didn't guide him well enough, or Munch failed because you didn't guide him well enough. And I was never like, you're Abe. I was like, you're the guardian angel of Abe. And so if I could build a connection between you and a character, and then I could have that character's destiny depend on your actions or what you cared or didn't care about, that would be, I felt like that's a good thing to hang it, you know, to pin down. And so Infinite Lives was part of that. I was like, as long as you're willing to keep trying, you'll eventually succeed. Unless we had a bug in the game that screwed that up, you know. I can't say that never happened, but that's how I was looking at it, and it worked. You know, I can't say it worked for everybody, but there was medicinal properties. Yeah. If you could say, I'm in a deep depression, and if I take this pill, I'll feel better and I'll be laughing in an hour. Or I'm playing this video game. If I start laughing in an hour, that's as valuable as the pill I could have bought. And in fact, I can't buy that pill legally. I don't know any pill I could buy legally that's going to make me happy and laughing in an hour. Right? So I was like, we're kind of making, and this is how I sold it to some venture in the beginning. I said, I was looking at it, I was like, how does the industry, how do the money guys care about it? They don't give a shit about my story. They give a shit about the story of the business. So I said, I got to admit something. I'm not really a game designer. I'm a electronic chemist focused on making addictive games. And then they were like, well, that's really interesting. You know, if I've been like, let me tell you a story about Abe. You know, like, when does the part that I'm interested come up? How much money is it going to make? Right? And so that was, I remember telling people that. I was like, I'm an electronic chemist, and I'm making addictive experiences. And you'd see the light bulb, they'd be like, tell me more, you know? And I knew that would hook them. So if we think about marketing, right, first people you're marketing to are people are going to finance you to do it. Next group you're marketing to is the people that are going to make it. And then the next group you're finally making to is selling it to is the audience, right? You're marketing to them. So it's really like 3 tiers of marketing in the process of building games. But that was my first tier, because I was like, if I can sound like that, I might sound a little smarter, necessarily that I am, but I might sound that way. But I know they'll be interested because, we all know games that are addictive sell more, right? So that I'm guilty of having used that line, but it definitely got their attention more.
Let me ask you something. There's so much that you've just shared with us. For the aspiring young Lorne Lannings out there that are listening, that are wanting to be you or saying, how can I get there? What advice would you give them?
I think it goes, focus on industrious craft first. Like, if you're an artist, you focus on the basics, focus on the timeless, focus on what Rembrandt was learning. Get that. What we have is we have a lot of people using computers today that don't know art. And they don't know how to draw, but they think they can because they make models. They don't know how to do this. They don't understand anatomy. They don't understand animation. The basics, right? They don't understand how to paint. True. But they can use Photoshop and eventually match something up, And I can always tell that work, right? It'll be like, you don't understand lighting. You just started with some samples that did, but you don't. And it's showing, So first, just at a skill level, I call it like industrial trade crafts. Like, focus on your craftsmanship first and focus on the basics. Because if you really know how to animate, or if you really know how to paint, if you really know how to draw, and I don't mean chemicals, I mean even in the computer, right? If you really know how to paint, you'll be able to solve all kinds of problems later. And look at something that just happened, right? Digital painting, I fell in love with, and I had no desire to paint anymore, but then I no longer had a physical piece I could sell. So you have artists like, Android Jones, I think it's Joey Trevino, I think. I might be getting the last name wrong, but he was an art director at ILM who was doing his own body of work, crazy stuff. And if you look at him, he's selling NFTs now. One of the art directors from God of War is selling his ZBrush models now. These people are making bucks. And I will never have a problem with artists finally making bank, right? Because look at history, right? Till we got in the later half of the 20th century, almost into the 21st century, artists weren't doing shit. Like I was telling you, we had two jobs, right? Hallmark or Disney, and no one was making that much buck. Now with games, it's largely games. Like games effects grew, and Hollywood talent went to India to train, went to China to train up people. Now we have a global industry of effects all over the place. But games really just boom, and to such a degree where even the Ivy League had to start having game courses or curriculum because people didn't want to apply for the film school anymore. They wanted to make games, right? So that shift occurred, and I watched Ivy League schools strum together crappy game programs and still charge Ivy League prices because somewhere mommy and daddy are happy that you're going to have a Harvard or Yale degree or whatever. But and that was kind of insightful too. You go, oh, this is supposedly the Ivy League, but now they're just trying to catch up with the audience, offering subpar services for premium prices. So learn your craft and be a pro. And this is the difference with a pro. The difference between a pro and an artist. The pro, the artist does a great job when he loves it. And he does a shitty job when he doesn't. The pro, you can't tell the difference. That's my take. Because I've worked with some guys I thought were great, and then they're like, it's just not moving me. And I'll be like, grow up. Like, become a pro, man. You're talking like a fine artist. You're not talking like a professional artist. If you give a job to Sid Mead, you're going to get Sid Mead. Right? Like, you're going to get something that dazzles you, even if he doesn't like the project. Same with Ralph McQuarrie, same with the best production designers in the world. And so it's tough to be like, well, I do great work when I'm stimulated, but when I'm not, I'm really lazy and I just toss shit over the wall. That's huge. So my lesson there is, first of all, don't do that. And second of all, go to a place that's industry, where you learn how to work with big teams, you learn how the craft works. And at night, keep notes on your own work. If you have a dream to tell stories, then start writing those stories. but don't always try and fit your dream into what their need is. Like, be a great team player, be a great professional artist. If it's the thing you love of all time, or it's the thing you wish you never had to work on, the audience should know the difference about how you felt about it. That's my big message. And then it's
amazing,
like,
Lorne.
Thank you,
dude. That is amazing, incredible. You know, I know that we're pressed for time now, so how can people follow you? What are your social tags? Where can we find you in order to keeping up with you and what you're up to?
I'm a little shy socially, so I can't say. If you look at my Twitter, I send things out occasionally, but I tend to be, I tend to like not want to blow it, right? And like, things go wrong. So, but anyway, I have Lorne Lanning. Lorne Lanning, Twitter. Have Facebook, which I'm rarely at these days. I'm getting more into Discord and Telegram, because that's where a lot of venture capitalists are on. So you like go with different things. And then of course, Oddworld Inc., the Twitter, we release all the game information. And then anytime I'm doing a podcast, like when you give me the link to this, I'll post that. So, and I'm going to get a lot better about posting more pertinent information, and hopefully there's more of it over time versus how scarce I've been in the past.
Oh, no worries, man. Lorne, thank you so much for your time. And for all of our audience out there, please go ahead and follow us on social media. You can find us at VGRT or at StarveUp on Twitter, videogamesrealtalk.com, or wherever you get your fine podcasts. It was a pleasure having Lorne on today. And if you are into this type of content, please feel free to share it, post it, tell us what you thought, what you like, what you didn't like. But more importantly, keep on. And, as Lorne says, you got to keep grinding. That's how you're going to make it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you guys all next week.